Good morning, everyone, or good evening if you are in Australia or New Zealand. Thank you for joining our second online conversation of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. My name is Marilde Iannotta, and I'm the Director of Communication for Voices of Faith. I will moderate today's event. Before we starting, a few technical details. As you probably know, our interpreters will provide simultaneous interpretation in other 4 languages: Spanish, French, Italian, and German. The interpretation channels are available by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. For now, please keep your microphone mute. We will give you the floor at the end of the speaker's speeches. So let's start. There are still stories of abuse being reported by Christians, but it's a little different now. Some of them reported focus on an unfamiliar, lesser-known type of abusive behavior that often takes place in the church: spiritual abuse. It's unbelievable how often spiritual abuse takes place within the church and Christian organizations. But maybe since it's not often talked about, people don't recognize it or even see it as a problem. Now, it's important to know that it's difficult for people to realize what they are experiencing is spiritual abuse. Very often, beginnings of the abuse are difficult to mark for the person who experiences it. The first step can consist of manipulation and gain trust. The measure of religious categories as obedience, God's will, or sacrifice has a terrifically strong and destructive power, especially on young persons. So, when is spiritual abuse actually taking place? What counts as spiritual abuse? I'm sure that our speakers today will help us to understand better what we are talking about. But to start now, please, let's have a look at the video we have prepared. This is one of the educational videos we have prepared with Dr. Rocio Figueroa, which is with us today, and Dr. Doris Reisinger. Each of these videos focused on various aspects of religious life, which we hope will help young religious to recognize abusive situations. So we can go.
At profession, you take 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Let's talk about poverty. Vowing poverty means embracing a simple lifestyle, serving others while living and working with items and amenities that serve a purpose but are not overly expensive or fancy. The actual purpose of your life and work is a kind of inner spiritual richness, to have God in your heart and to enrich the lives of others with your generosity and service. If you own property before you join, or if property is left to you after you join a convent, you cannot keep it for yourself, but it does not automatically become property of the congregation either. You may give it freely to whoever you choose. Everything you earn while you are a sister automatically becomes the property of your community. For example, you cannot receive personal income that you can keep for yourself. Equally, everything you need as a sister must be provided to you from the community. That includes food and clothing, enough private space, hygiene products, healthcare and insurance, training, and access to means of travel, communication, and information. Vowing poverty also entails that you put your energy and skills at the service of the community. while having a right to a balanced work schedule and to enough rest and free time to stay physically and mentally healthy. If you are required to be available around the clock, work 12 hours or more a day with no sufficient breaks, this is a red flag. If the equipment and training you receive is inadequate and does not allow you to live and work in a decent and healthy manner, this is not evangelical poverty but exploitation. If you are pressured into writing a will, leaving everything you own and will ever own to the congregation, this is a red flag. If there is no transparency in your congregation so that only very few are informed about the finances of the community, or if there are signs that some sisters live a much more comfortable life than others, these are red flags. And finally, if poverty is turned into a tool of dependency and humiliation, making you beg and justify your need for necessary things for daily life, this is a red flag too. The vow of poverty does not take away anything from you that you need. On the contrary, it allows you to be completely there for others without having to waste precious time and energy on external and material possessions.
So after this video, let's introduce our today's speakers. We have a testimony from Anna Adamchikova. She is a former nun of the Order of the Missionaries of Charity in Slovakia, now in Latin America. She is telling about her painful story of abuse she suffered during long years in the order. So we will see her experience later. I would like to introduce also Dr. Rocio Figueroa, theologian. We are happy to be able to call our friends and theological advisor. And also, I would like to introduce Dr. Tracy McKeevan, also our close friend from Women and the Australian Church. But please, as I told you, I would like to introduce the testimony of Anna Adamchikova.
My name is Anna Adamchikova, and religious name was Sister Damiana. For me to come out of the Missionaries of Charity was kind of a wake-up, and I was in MCs around 25 years. Slovakia, in my time when I was little, was and is a very Catholic country, and my family especially was also very, very traditional and is traditional and Catholic. And so I grew in this family that was very protective and very going to the church. But at the same time, we lived in the communist regime, and the communist regime was like real communist regime. We were like persecuted, and when I was a teenager, I remember that we were going for mass, and we used to have a choir practice singing, and it was under the ground because there was a kind of a communist spy that were like after us, and if they find out that we were, for example, going to the church, we could not go to the school we wanted, or the people couldn't has to get out from the work they were working. So we were living in fear, no? It was like a real persecution, and I remember that once we were in the choir practice, and there was a noise from outside, and we have to be in silence and in darkness for some time because we were afraid they will find us out, no? So these conditions, it was very important for me also why I chose this congregation, because the difficulties that I live in the communist regime inspired me also, because there was this kind of a, we wanted to give up for Jesus whatever was difficult. I have chosen this congregation because it attracted me in this way, that there was a kind of a giving up of everything. They were very poor, and also I love the religious habit that the sisters were having, like it was white. I did not like the black habit, and the idea of going far, going for the missions. That was the most important things for me. Bueno, since I entered with so much enthusiasm and with that idea of sacrificing and offering, and so I entered prepared in some way for these conditions. But yes, the conditions were over my expectation. I was really taken back with so many things in the formation in Poland. I joined in Poland, and from the very beginning, the next day already we started the religious life in 100%. So we get up 4:40 in the morning, and during the day, I mean, it was very, very surprising for me that we were controlled from 4:40 in the morning till 10 o'clock. I mean, we had no space for ourselves to be by ourselves. Maybe in the toilet, but it was like the mistress always knew where we were or what we were doing. So for me that was very complicated. I was not prepared for that. No, I felt really, but again, no, I mean, you just want to give everything for God, and so whatever they were asking, you just try to give up whatever you want or whatever you think it's natural for you, and just you try to fix yourself in that frame that is Missionaries of Charity, and to be formed in this way. And it was really like a military formation. I was absolutely convinced in this time that it was needed. I mean, I was thinking that it has to be like this. No, it was just part of the training, and also I idealize so much the religious and the Missionaries of Charity, and the point also was that they were always explaining to us that these sacrifices are for Jesus and it is for souls. So there was always like a meaning in these drastic things that they were asking us or we were doing, no? That every sacrifice had a meaning. When I entered, and there was still this kind of a habit that we used to bake the food. We used to go to bake the food for us and for the people we were having in the home, men who were alcoholics and old people. So we used to go for begging, and when I was already postulant, they gave us a sari. They gave us this long habit that I have to learn how to walk because it was somehow uncomfortable. I did not know how to walk with a skirt and long one. And we used to go to beg with these plastic boxes, and we used to go to the market where the people were selling things that are like without, like it was not shops, but just on the open free place. And with these plastic boxes, the people used to give us the extra things that they couldn't sell. And what happens is that when we were eating, we used to have every day a bread and oil. And these things that we got from the begging were ham. And we were not eating ham every day, only on Sundays. So we used to keep this ham till Sunday. And since we have no refrigerator, yeah, the ham was already not good when we got it. So on the end, it was green. And we have to eat it. We have to eat it because there was this kind of a divine providence, and it was, I mean, till we couldn't swallow it, we were eating it. And I remember that it was very hard for me, that things were spoiled. And when I was eating the ham, for example, and the cheese and the things that were spoiled, It was very difficult, but I was somehow trying to survive. I was trying to not to be ashamed of what I have chosen for my family, like that I want to give up. So very often I was like a kind of a really suffering by myself. I had difficulty to walk with this habit for the first time. I had difficulty to eat the food. And many times I remember even sausages, there was no refrigerator, and the sausages we were putting in the cold water to preserve them for some time. But when we were eating them, they were already sour and acid and all these things. It was so complicated, but I simply wanted to show my family that I manage, and I want to offer it for God. So for my family, that they will be proud of me, that I could do it, and for Jesus, that somehow was asking for my sacrifices to offer it for souls. This all this difficulty, I somehow I took it, and I really suffer in silence. And I remember that I was so anxious with all these things that were not allowing me to be free, that I was just crying. I was crying because there was also this difficulty that we couldn't speak with each other. I mean, they were from the beginning not allowing us to speak our own language. They were not allowing us to speak in Polish. We had to speak English from the beginning. So there was no this personal encounter with my companions. And we had to speak about our personal matters only with the mistress, and the mistress was encouraging us to be open book. But for me, I needed like to share in the same level person that was my companion, my sisters, but I couldn't share personal matters. So, and also there was no time to share the personal matters because every minute there was something to do. And even when we used to go for apostolate for outside, we were told we should pray the rosary on the way. And so when we didn't pray the rosary, we have to speak the folds and kiss the floor. So not to feel guilty and not to that we are doing something wrong, we were simply trying to not to speak about personal matters with each other on the way. So there was this, in the Missionaries of Charity, there is something very strange, or maybe it's very common in all the religions, I don't know. But there is this point that they say that the superior can make a mistake in commanding, but you can never mistake in obeying. So this time, I find the conclusion or find explanation or give the reason for everything difficult in that sentence. And today I see that this sentence is the best thing for manipulating the conscience, because of course, if you don't question anything, if you don't see the meaning and you just put the meaning that everything has the sense, you get trapped. And I think that with this sentence, I just did whatever they told me, and that was the excuse for all that one passed through or find difficult or suffered.
Ana da un testimonio que no es una queja personal por haberlo pasado mal en la congregación que eligió, sino que Ana da el testimonio de un fenómeno llamado abuso de conciencia, del cual ella no tiene ninguna responsabilidad. Las víctimas de abuso de conciencia no son culpables de ser víctimas de abuso de conciencia.
In 1997, I was sent to Argentina, and it was a happy moment. I was sent far from Poland to Argentina. It was like a wow. And I was really full of enthusiasm. And when I came to the house, we were having old people and also the alcoholics who were from the street. It was really beautiful mission. I mean, to work with the people, poor people, it's really great. And I really enjoyed. Only problem was that I need to learn language. I need to speak Spanish. And we had some little time to learn language, but also we were just also in the apostolate. So, and since I was a nurse, my superior put me in charge of this big number of men, and I was with the aspirants, with the candidates, working together. So the problem was also language, that I was speaking little, and being in charge, I needed to handle so many responsibility. So I was like a kind of trying to find somebody who spoke little English, and I was trying with one man to arrange the apostolate. And beautiful as it was, I think I fall in the hands of a superior that was not so nice for me. And I was thinking that taking vows, my formation or that rigidity was like over, and suddenly I came to the mission that there was no change in the formation, and I think it was even worse, because I don't know, the superior that I had was a very strange woman. I don't know what to say, but she was having some psychological problem, I think. If the sisters disobey her a little, she used to get very, very angry, and she couldn't control it. And I remember once I went to the refectory where the sister was there with her speaking, and she was fighting with her on the end, and only she took her clothes and she threw them on the floor. And then in the night, she was afraid that this sister will run away, so she locked us in the house and she put the key under the pillow. It was very strange behavior that I never saw. I mean, it was like a kind of a wow, what she's doing. We used to come back from the apostolate to come home for the toilet, because we go to the toilet in our own home. And she was not happy, because she was always sitting in the house. I don't know what she was doing. And when we used to come home to go to the toilet, she used to scold us, and she used to call us animals. And I really did. We used to go with a fear to go to the toilet, because she was always there and asking us what we were doing there. And I remember in one moment, we had a big house with a big compound, and I used to go out to the gate, and in the gate we have a little opening that we used to see if somebody is waiting there, from the poor people. And I remember I was in such a difficult moment with her, that I used to look through the hall, and I was imagining that she is a superior who has a responsibility and the power in this place, but there in the road behind this little hall, there was no more power of my superior. And I really wanted to just put my leg, because there was something that I was not feeling free, and I wanted that freedom, and I wanted to go on the street. I just couldn't take it anymore. No, there was this kind of a heaviness over me, that she was not allowing us to be human. It was very strange, because she told us to offer up. She told us to give up. She told us to give it for Jesus. And she said that to be saint, it is this. It is just to offer up everything, and to sacrifice for souls, and to be little flower again. And so you believe me, I hate little flower. I just don't want to hear about little flower, because all the human things that were so difficult and that we want to share, we were always spiritualizing them, and it was simply already difficult to manage the thing, to be with her humanly, and since still we have to offer everything. So I mean, today I think it's crazy, because you are in that circle that you can be yourself. You are trained, and you are thinking, and you are willing, and you are wanting finally what they want, because there is no other thing. There is no other relationship. There is no other circle that you can, and other thing that you can't speak with the volunteers. You cannot speak with the priest without permission. So you are closed in between your superior and between your sisters who are in the community, who are in the same position and in the same mess that you are finally.
En el contexto católico, el abuso de conciencia es un tipo de abuso de poder jurídico o espiritual que controla la conciencia de la víctima hasta el punto que el abusador, tomando el lugar de Dios, obstruye o anula la libertad de juicio de la víctima y le impide estar a solas con Dios en su conciencia. Este tipo de abuso es perpetrado por un representante de la iglesia, que es respaldado por la iglesia como digno de confianza. Por lo tanto, el abuso de conciencia siempre tiene una dimensión institucional.
But then I was sent to Chile, and in Chile, first of all, I love the country because it's very similar to Slovakia with the mountains. But also, for the first time, I was working with the children who were having neurological problems. And these children were just fantastic. I mean, it was such a beautiful work and so fulfilling because they were abandoned children, children with disabilities. And they were small little babies, so they were very vulnerable. So it's very easy to take care of these kind of children. In this time also, when happened with the Karadima, came a priest to my community, and I was in this time superior. I was in charge of the house and the children, and in charge of community. So after the mass, this priest used to stay, and he used to take breakfast. And I used to ask him about Karadima also, and he I think I got proper person because he started to share about Karadima because he lived with him. And the priest was telling that he was abused spiritually, and he used to share about the spiritual abuse. Now, for me, spiritual abuse was unknown. I did not understand what it means, spiritual abuse and abuse of conscience. And then I used to ask him, and he used to share all the story with the man, with the Karadima. And finally he said that he ran away from him. I mean, he asked to be changed to another parish. And then I said, but in what consists this difficulty? And he used to tell that Karadima, on the end, Karadima was asking the smallest little intimate things of life with whom he was, having a spiritual guidance. And he used to tell, we have to tell him everything. We have to tell him what clothes we bought, when we used to go to the family, when we used to go for the vacation, with whom we were speaking. We used to, and I was looking at him, and I used to, but it's normal. I mean, he is a superior. I mean, he should be knowing, no? And I said, but how can this be an abuse, no? And then he started to explain to me about this fuero interno, about the conscience and the freedom on conscience, and about the abuse of conscience, and where the superior cannot completely take the place of God, and where you have to be alone with God. And I mean, the priest helped me to know where to see the barriers, where is the spiritual abuse, and where is the conscience, no, where the superior should not enter. And that was something for me very new, and I used to start to be very sensitive.
Ana habló de un aspecto que a mí me parece muy relevante, que es la idea de la obediencia. Y la obediencia como una forma de llegar a la santidad, unido al lugar del superior, suplantando la voz de Dios. Estos tres anclajes son tremendamente dañinos. Estamos hablando de una congregación donde no hay un abusador con un trastorno psiquiátrico, como es el caso de Karadima, del caso Karadima, en que tenemos un abusador perverso, una persona que tiene la intención de dominar al otro para su bien personal. En este caso, lo complicado es que hay una cultura. Hay una cultura, y una cultura son creencias, son acciones ligadas a esas creencias, y ahí es donde se encuentra el problema.
And I remember a story of one sister who was with me in Argentina with a superior who was very difficult, and she was very dear to me, and she was there in Calcutta, and she told me a story that was for her very complicated, and because of conscience. And she told me, they put me in charge of a novice who took the medicine because she was having difficulty with her mistress. We don't know her intention, but she simply went in coma. And since I am nurse, the general told me to take care of her. And I was there with her, and I told the general, this little one is in coma. I don't know what medicine she took, and I am having a fear that she could go away. I mean, we have to take her to hospital to clean her stomach and to be sure that it is out, because the medicine could act and she can pass away. And the general told her not to do it. She told her to trust in God and to stay with her, accompany her, and to pray that it will not happen, that she will go away and she will survive. And she didn't want to take her to hospital. Then I was telling her, but why she didn't want to take her to hospital? And she told, I really don't know. Maybe she didn't want to make a case. It was just time for the mothers to be canonized. And I told her, but she could die. And then she said, that's my problem. I did not know. She wanted to stay, that I will stay there, but this child could die there. And we were risking her life. And we didn't want to take her to hospital only because it was going to be scandal. And then there was another thing that really was like a bomb for me, because a sister died, and we always get a letter when the sister died, and they send us a letter from Calcutta about her life, about what happened to her and when she died and all these things. And then after some time, we got the news, not from our sisters, but from the bishops of Calcutta, that told the story about our sister to another sisters, and it came to our sisters. Simply, she took her life. She hung herself on a sar in the toilet. And when I heard this, again, maybe when I got sick, I did not feel so much pain, but I feel so much pain for my sisters. And she went this way. She died this way. What the anxiety she must be having if she hung herself on a sar in the toilet. She hid herself to suicide because we don't have place even to die, I think. And she suicided in the toilet hidingly, and they didn't tell us the truth. And we have to come to know the news from another sisters, from another congregations. So I went to the regional and I told her, sister, what is this? Why you don't tell us the truth? That is the minimum that you can tell us. If they don't take care and they don't want to solve the problem and look at the problems of the communities, why they don't tell us the truth on the end? And she told me such a stupid answer that I was thinking. She told me, what, you want to tell the truth in the paper, in the letter, you want that the other sisters will do the same? Wow. I mean, this answer is absolutely incompatible with the reality. I mean, this sister is not okay because one sister took her life because there was difficulty, and we hide her ending because we don't want that the others will imitate her. So I was thinking, how many truths they hide, how many sisters maybe died and we don't know, how many difficulties are there we don't know, how many painful stories are there and we don't know. And it's painful, and I think it should not just pass like we cannot, okay, we hide the things because of the people outside don't know, but we hide to each other, so it means there is a big problem. There is a big abuse that we don't want, that we, even to each other, that we know about this, no? I couldn't do it. I mean, I couldn't do it anymore. And I told her, I'm going. I asked for a year of discernment, and I just couldn't pass these things like it is nothing happened, no? Because finally this priest made me sensible to this abuse, and my conscience was already like shouting in me, that this is not okay, this is not okay, this is not for God, this is something they are doing, that's something that is not from God. Finally, I after 3 months, I got the letter that I could go. So I was preparing my things and I wanted to go for my discernment. And the sister still told me, I said, "Sister, I am going." And she told me, "Oh, Damiana, you are looking for yourself. You are going because you got tired of offering and for giving up for Jesus, and you are running away from the cross, and you promised to be faithful, and you are running from the difficulties." I can tell you that if I would not have these priest words that this is the abuse, I would also not be able to go. I needed someone outside to support me with it, knowing how the abuse is working, that they will tell me exactly these things, what they tell me, that I'm running away from the cross, for me to feel guilty. So I knew that I will hear these things. So I just told, no, I am not running away from the cross. I am right there on the cross. I just cannot, my conscience, for me, it was something that I always try that they will not take it away, even though it was difficult. But that conscience that I struggled when I was in communist regime, that I always try to fight and try to go against difficulty, even they were like in the communist regime was difficult. I always felt that I have to fight for the truth. And so when I found the truth, I couldn't stay anymore. There was something that I simply couldn't see the things and not to do anything and to stay, because I felt like I'm part of something that is not okay. So I said, I'm going, and I was going. I was preparing my things, and yeah, for me to leave the sari, that sari, that habit that I was always proud of, it was something that was identifying me, something that was part of me for 25 years. And I was crushed by taking it off. I was feeling like I'm taking away my skin, really. And I had difficulty. I was out. I was without sari, and I have to go for therapy because I couldn't make it. I was feeling like naked. I was feeling like I lost identity. And the worst thing was, I really did not know how it affects when you come out after so many years. I remember a moment, it was very strong, that I was in Santiago in metro, and there was a part of one station that is very, very deep, and I was there in one moment where there were so many people crossing, going from one side to the other, and I was there, and suddenly I saw there was a crowd going. There were so many people coming, and I looked back, and there were so many people going from behind me, and I had no habit. Now, before, with the habit, I was always representing Missionaries of Charity, and I was always the point when the people were looking at me. But this time I was not having habit, and I realized that nobody was looking at me. So when I realized they were not looking at me, I thought, they don't see me. And I felt that they don't see me, because suddenly I did not feel I am real. I felt like I'm transparent, that I have not body, because I had no habit, and I felt they will smash me. I felt they did not see me, and there were so many coming, and I was not used to go on the metro, and that I closed my eyes because I couldn't do it. I was so scared. I got like a phobia. I was thinking they will smash me because they did not see me. And then suddenly I went to the wall, and I was kind of touching the wall, and I was trying to realize that I had no identity. I did not exist. And then I slowly, like, I tried to come back, and I remember this point when the mistress told me that you are without head and you are no more you. And then I realized that it was true. I was no more there. There was nothing of me left. But I never felt it before, only when I gave up my habit and I was alone, and I needed to just to put back my corporality to be Anna again and not a sister. And I came out from the background down and come up, and I started to slowly to connect myself again. No, again, I look for my head to be back myself, but I try to recover Jesus back, Jesus that gave us life and wants to give me life and loves me the way I am and to be happy. No, I don't know, to be free. Thank you.
On behalf of all Voices of Faith team, I would like to thank Anna Adamchikova for this thrilling, personal, and important testimony. We had some technical problems during the streaming of the video, and we apologize for that, but I think it was still very powerful for all of us. So I would like to introduce now again our first today's speaker, Dr. Rocio Figueroa, theologian. We are happy to be able to call our friend and theological advisor. Born in Lima, Peru, lives in New Zealand, a former responsible for the women's section in the Pontifical Council of Laity, published extensively on theology in face of abuse, and accompanied numerous survivors in their lonely way to recover from abuse in the church context. By telling publicly her story during 2018 Voices of Faith event, she gave a strong example how to overcome silence and speak about abuse. Dr. Rocio Figueroa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Good morning and good afternoon for all of you. After this touching testimony, I realize also as a survivor, advocate, and researcher, how important is to name things properly regarding abuse. The key moment for Anna was when she recognized, when the priest helped her to show her that it was an abuse. In the Catholic Church and in popular culture, the term sexual abuse has been usually related to physical violence or sexual violence, such as rape. It has been hard to address the fact that people that are sexually abused are not only abused through physical or psychological or through physical violence, but through psychological and spiritual violence. And we have the same problem regarding a spiritual abuse. Many don't talk about it. Actually, our Anna didn't know the word. Many consider that if we talk about spiritual abuse, we are exaggerating, calling it an abuse. For many, the word spiritual abuse is too strong. I will give you an example. I uploaded this post on Facebook because I thought it was illustrative of the situation of women. At the top, you see the Saudi Arabian Assembly about women's rights. So men deciding about women's rights. At the bottom, we see the synod about the family, cardinals and bishops talking about the family and women. What do they have in common? Both groups violate the rights of women by not allowing them to participate in the decision-making process of their communities. The interesting thing was that the responses that I received in Facebook, two Catholic men, one from Italy and the other from Peru, commented on the post. One said, these two realities are not comparable. You should know better. And the other man said to me, with that logic, Jesus, who was a man, would not have had authority to talk about women. And really, do you think that these two realities can be compared? For me, this was like a illuminating moment, because it is fascinating that these Catholic men could not see the comparison. Muslims use violence against women, but they didn't think it happened in the Catholic Church. Also, the first man felt that I should know better. So for him, I had a problem of interpretation or knowledge, or lack of knowledge. And the second man compared the bishops with Jesus's authority. So I have two comments here. I think that the problem lies in how we define and understand violence. In popular culture, the term violence is usually linked to an act of force. If we only understand violence in this narrow way, as an act of force, it will be very difficult to comprehend the significance of a spiritual violence or a spiritual abuse, because it is not an act of force. But it was very easy, for example, for my Facebook contacts to see the physical violence against women in Islam, but they were not able to see the quiet and silent violence in the Catholic Church. So we need to understand violence in a broader sense. Newton Garber, who defined what is violence, he said that it is not just the use of force, but it is also defined in terms of the verb to violate. Newton Garber affirmed that there are two kinds of rights that can be violated: our right to our own body, our right of dignity, of our own dignity as a person. And of course, the problem is that while physical violence can be seen, spiritual abuse or spiritual violence is not clear at plain sight and can be perpetrated without being addressed. The second problem is that up until now, the ones who have interpreted the gospel, the values, the experiences of faith as Catholics have always been men. So we women have been hermeneutically marginalized, influenced by more hermeneutically powerful groups. That is what Fricker calls hermeneutical injustice. So we are victims of a formal violence. When I look at those photos, I feel identified as a victim of hermeneutical violence, injustice. I am not allowed to interpret as a true participant in the Catholic Church with my voice. I am not considered worthy enough as a woman to be included in the process of decision-making and interpretation. As the men told me in the Facebook, you should know better. So my experience as how I feel is not enough. I should know better. So let's give a broader example of hermeneutical injustice. Sexual violence has been interpreted by men in a number of ways. Sexual harassment is flirting. Rape in marriage as non-rape. Postnatal depression, hysteria. Spiritual abuse, an exaggeration. And let's define what is a spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse, I give this definition from Lisa Oakley, a specialist in spiritual abuse. She says, it's a form of emotional and psychological abuse that is characterized by a systematic pattern of coercive and controlled behavior in a religious context. This abuse may include manipulation and exploitation, enforced accountability, censorship of decision-making, requirements for secrecy and silence, coercion to conform, control through the use of sacred texts or teaching, as Anna was saying, sacrifice, give up, requirement of obedience to the abuser, the suggestion that the abuser has a divine position, isolation as a means of punishment, and superiority and elitism. The key element of spiritual abuse is the use of spiritual power as the leader represents God. And it can have a profound impact on the religious faith of the victims. Oakley's definition highlights that it is a form of emotional and psychological abuse. But it's interesting because in a conference that she has given some months ago at the University of Chester, she said that also it has to be defined in its own realm, in its theological realm, because it's not just an emotional and psychological abuse. It includes emotional and psychological abuse. But spiritual abuse has its own characteristic, that is the abuse of power, of her spiritual power. And while his definition of a spiritual abuse highlights the agency of the perpetrator, Doris Reisinger defines a spiritual abuse from the perspective of the one who suffers the abuse. For her, spiritual abuse is a violation of a spiritual freedom, because if an act of faith does not originate from the free will of a person, but simply from her lack of alternatives, or worse, from manipulation, coercion, or violence, it is quite plainly not an act of faith. I will link the two definitions, that of Oakley and that of Doris. I would like to say, spiritual abuse is the violation of a person's spiritual freedom by a leader who misuses their religious power. In our communities, religious communities, we have seen many religious women are suffering spiritual abuse, and it has never been addressed. In this moment, I am working with my colleague, Professor David Toombs, in a qualitative study with ex-nuns, victims of spiritual abuse from the Peruvian community Siervas del Plan de Dios, or servants of God's plan. The Servants of the Plan of God is a community of nuns that were founded in 1998 by Figari, Luis Fernando Figari, the same founder of Sodalicio, who is today accused of sexual abuse, abuse of power, and psychological abuse against members of the community. We can see the hand of Figari in all his foundations. But this scandal exploded in 2012. Unfortunately, with the Servants of Plan of God, I have discovered that is Figari's abusive culture still thriving there. And to understand what is spiritual abuse, I will just give a little bit more examples, like those of Anna, of the testimonies of these nuns from Peru. This article has been published November 27. So Ross says, the spiritual abuse was violent. I could not complain about any suffering. A question of the examination of conscience was, did I show my tiredness to others? They always told us that if we were tired, we should not show it or express it. If the sisters saw me with a grumpy face, they said I was an ass face. They never allowed me to express my emotions. To show that you were tired was a sin. As we can see, Sana said afterwards, in 2006, I suffered an accident as a result of obeying an absurd order from my superior. I couldn't go down some stairs. I had to go down others that were too dark, but I was told that I have to overcome my fear. I went down the stairs and fractured my tibia and fibula. That was the first of 15 surgeries I had in the community. When they asked me how I felt, I said they forced me down those stairs. The superior corrected me and made me write 100 times that he who or she who obeys is never wrong. She told me that I could not question and that God had allowed that accident. Alejandra affirms, I was the maid of the superior. I had to pick her underwear and wash it. I washed it by hand because she asked me to scrub. I took her food to her room, nice food that we never ate. She made me do her assignments at the university. She did not care about plagiarism and putting her name of the work that I did. In all these examples, we can see how religious obedience has been understood as the expectation that one would not only follow the orders of a superior, but completely abandon one's will and intellect. But this concept is in the standard in religious life. In Perfecte Caritatis of the Second Vatican Council, it affirms, in proficient obedience, religious offer the full surrender of their own will as a sacrifice of themselves to God. Subject themselves in faith to their superiors who hold the place of God. In a religious setting, the requirement to obey authority without question is closely associated with spiritual abuse. How women abused other women. Davis Weir states that spiritual abuse can be intentional if a leader misuses power in the name of Jesus. And sometimes it is something that has been passed down from one leader to another. For example, this was the case of the Peruvian Servants of God's Plan. It was passed down from the founder to the superiors, to the women superiors. But according to Weir, in some circumstances, spiritual abuse occurs when tradition is involved and the rules and regulations are not questioned. These distinctions of intentional and unintentional abuses make it more difficult to delineate and address the problem. For example, this definition of obedience, of abandon your will, abandon your reason, the superior represents God, is a bomb. We have heard about it, but it has passed through generations, and it can constitute a structural spiritual violence. For me, the tradition of religious life regarding obedience is a structural spiritual violence. If our tradition affirms that we must obey superiors because they represent God, we have a problematic equation. That is why we need to redefine obedience, because the vow of obedience is to God, to the status of the congregations, not to an authority that looks for their own interests. This type of spiritual abuse is what we mentioned before as hermeneutical injustice. This kind of abuse or violence is less visible, and I would say it's a quiet violence, because those who suffer it possess a formative inherent bias that makes it impossible for them to recognize their own abuse. So, why did these nuns allow it to happen? They could not see the full reality of their own experience. They were suffering hermeneutical injustice. They were saying by the tradition that it was obeying God, that it was a sacrifice, that it was giving up, because they interpreted the abuse as an act of obedience to God himself. What has done the Vatican regarding this question? Well, the Vatican responds to the abuse of the servants of God's plan. One of them received a letter the 25th of October 2021. And they say, for the good of all and for the good of the church, the same authorities has been acted to ask, overcome, and correct the improper aspects that were found in the government, in the formation and the verification of possible acts of abuse of power, of psychological violence, or manipulation of the conscience. So they just talk to them to say, please correct yourself. Is that the right answer? It's such a weak answer. It's like, okay, nothing, we will talk to them. But if we are talking about a systemic problem, they cannot see it because they are in the system. So it is really a very weak response. Like, there is no process, there are no policies, there is not a commission to investigate these abuses. So I think that much more has to be done. While studies about spiritual abuse have been developed in other churches, little has yet been done in the Catholic context. How is possible that the Congregation for Religious Life, who we have 600,000 of religious life and are led by 2 men, and how a woman who is an undersecretary has not the power to decide about all these topics? Because I have worked in the Vatican and the undersecretary has no power. They have to obey the cardinal. So here I have seen things have to change. The participants of my research are giving light on how these factors contributed to their own abuse. If these elements are not discussed, are not addressed, it will not be possible to solve the root of the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rocio Figueroa, also for your continuous collaboration and support with Voices of Faith. As I told at the beginning of our conversation, the educational videos we realize view your support and collaboration. So a big thank also for this. Thank you for your support. Okay, now please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Tracy McEwan. Tracy, also our close friend from Women and the Australian Church, where she is a vice president, a very active member of Catholic Women's Council. Tracy has a Master of Theology and a Bachelor of Applied Science, and is currently undertaking a PhD at the University of Newcastle. Her research will explore the religious identity and participation of Generation X women in Australia who currently or have previously identified as Catholic. Dr. McEwan, you have the floor. You have, okay.
Thank you for welcoming me here this evening if you're in Australia or in New Zealand, or in the morning if you're in Europe or elsewhere. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather. Here in the land just south of Sydney in Australia, where I'm speaking from, we acknowledge the Darawal people, and we pay our respects to the Darawal elders past and present, and to emerging leaders. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and Indigenous peoples who are listening here today, and acknowledge that this land has never been ceded and was and always will be Aboriginal land. So tonight I'm going to speak about the research that I've been doing as part of my doctorate. So I'm not Dr. McEwan just yet. So during the course of interviews conducted as part of my doctoral research on Generation X women and the Catholic Church in Australia, participants frequently articulated the pain and struggle they deal with day to day as they negotiate their embodied lives with the material and structural inequalities in Catholicism. In particular, the women told stories of the spiritual harm of being silenced and oppressed as they live out the effects of Catholic practices and teachings, particularly those which establish paradigms around gender and sexuality. Today, I will explore some of these encounters and contextualize them as a form of spiritual abuse. I will argue these experiences are so commonplace in the context of Catholicism that they've been normalised as an ordinary and quotidian part of Catholic women's lives. In sociological literature, the notion of lived or everyday religion is used to theorise how religious and spiritual identities, beliefs and practices are experienced in daily life, both in concert with and in opposition to authoritarian discourses. Lived or everyday religion describes how religion is expressed in daily life through practices, rituals, and encounters. It incorporates how the body encounters the spiritual and religious, not just in official or institutional rituals, but also in ordinary embodied practices and experiences. During interviews, when questioned about their involvement in the Catholic Church, Generation X women recounted narratives of lived Catholicism. They told stories of belief, ritual, and embodied praxis constructed from an intersection of the many complex discursive elements of their religious and secular lives. This was not unexpected. Generation X are the generation born between 1965 and 1980. This means they received their formation after the Second Vatican Council and grew up in a Catholic Church, often without the powerful discourse, ideology, and Catholic culture that served as a bond for previous generations of Catholics. Further, increases in women's rights through feminist social change agendas have impacted how women experience Catholicism and construct their identities. Yet, in spite, or perhaps even in contrast to this, in Catholicism, a male-only clerical hierarchy continues to put forward a specific model of womanhood. There's expectations of conformity to Catholic teachings that are set out in official documents and in canon law. As an effect of male hegemony, Catholic women encounter inequalities and have their involvement limited by very particularised understandings of gender and sexuality that legitimise and reinforce patriarchal doctrine and structures. This is profoundly impacting on the religious experiences of Catholic women. We've heard the powerful testimony of Anna, and Rochelle has defined and discussed spiritual abuse. I argue that Catholic women experience spiritual abuse when they are compelled to be accountable to the limited and particularised understandings of gender and sexuality that affirm a sense of sacral unworthiness or spiritual inferiority. Yet, as the women I spoke to told their stories, they did not name or describe their experience in these terms. However, as Anna and Rochelle described, spiritual abuse often triggers a process of struggle in which individuals wrestle with spiritual matters. Although my participants do not name spiritual abuse in their stories, they clearly articulate the struggle of grappling day to day with lived Catholicism. I would now like to briefly introduce you to a few of my participants, the participants from my study. All my participants live in Australia. They're from Generation X and either currently or previously identified as Catholic. My doctoral research is being undertaken with the approval of the Human Research Ethics Committee at the University of Newcastle. So in accordance with ethical protocols, I've changed each woman's name and image to protect her identity. Monica grew up in a deeply religious Catholic household. Growing up, she attended daily mass and went to Catholic schools. She told me this story. She says, I decided I wanted kids overnight almost. It was really very strange. But then I had a problem because my husband, he'd had a vasectomy. So I had to do IVF, which is another problem with the Catholic Church. I think that's when my guilt started really to kick in, because I thought if I do this, I'm just the devil. A family member told Monica that babies conceived using reproductive techniques had no soul and would not go to heaven. Unsure what to do, she asked several priests and received very different answers. In the end, Monica decided to proceed. Unfortunately, Monica's fertility treatment wasn't a straightforward process. And as her cycles failed, she recounts how she felt abandoned by God. She says, I went to a healing mass. I was getting really depressed about my cycles failing all the time. I was crying my eyes out. And I was talking to God and saying, why won't you give me a child? And I think at that moment, I made a deal with God. And I said, if you give me kids, I'll raise them as Catholic. But even a deal with God wasn't that simple. Monica recalls, I was still quite resentful because I thought this isn't working because it's against God. God doesn't want me to do this. And I still saw things in the space of reward, sin, punishment, and hell. That next month, I did fall pregnant. It was pretty intense. In the interview, I asked Monica whether this was a conversion moment, a moment of conversion, but she said that she still remains uncertain and confused. She said, I don't feel like I love God because it's never been explained to me in terms of loving God. I struggle with this all the time, you know. I think about it a lot and I read a lot. Monica chooses to continue to practice Catholicism. And she told me, the prayer I say when I go to Mass is, please help me understand this because I don't get it. I don't even know why I'm here, but I made a deal. In her narrative, Monica says she struggles all the time with living out the effects of Catholic teachings related to reproduction. She shows clear signs of spiritual struggle. She battles in her relationship with God and the role of the divine providence in her life. There is tension with her family and priests as she grapples with how to reconcile her need for medical assistance to conceive. She's uncertain and has conflicting thoughts about the place of God and Catholic teachings and practices in her everyday life. Several other interview participants also related stories of spiritual struggle in their narratives of lived Catholicism. For some, such as Monica, their harm and suffering related to Catholic teachings around reproductive and sexual rights. For others, their spiritual struggle related to the effects of male hegemony and the limited role allocated to women in church life. Libby says, it is the crushingly, overwhelmingly male nature of the Catholic Church and the refusal to surrender any power or influence. I feel like the church does not exist for women, really. Struggling to find a parish where her theological education is valued, Prudence claims, it is a huge problem in relation to how priests treat women. They are clueless, most of them. It is as though I have nothing between this ear and this ear. Grace spoke of the moment she realised she couldn't be ordained as a deacon because she was a woman. She recalls, I spoke to the priest at the end of Mass and I said, can women be deacons? Could I do that? And he said, no, Rome says no. And it was like a door slammed on my soul. I just couldn't believe it. I was so deeply hurt. Knowing that despite a strong calling, she can never be a priest, Bernadette asserts, we pray for priests on Vocation Sunday for crying out loud. It's like, well, okay, we are mostly women here. What? Who are you talking to? Sorry, what vocation? I'm praying for others. I want to yell at them and say, are you fools? do not see. Ruby has experienced workplace bullying as she fulfills her vocation as a teacher in a Catholic school. She recounts, "When I moved to work at that school, I was offered to share this house with a guy, but I actually had to go and ask the priest permission to go and live with him. When I met my husband, I had to stay in town living with a guy until we were married. The deputy principal used to drive past my home in town at night to see whether my car was there or not." Just like Monica, Bernadette, Prudence, Ruby, and Liddy, a number of participants clearly articulate the pain and struggle they experience as they grapple with teachings on sexuality and gender and manage the gap between Catholicism and their everyday embodied reality. Yet, as I said earlier, no participant clearly names their experience as a form of spiritual abuse. In a patriarchal institution, such as the Catholic Church, where maleness is normative and the embodiment of women is ignored, it can be difficult for women to recognise and name their experience. Carol Christ observes that when women's stories are not told, instead of recognising their own experiences, giving names to their feelings, and celebrating their perceptions of the world, women have often suppressed and denied them. When stories a woman reads or hears do not validate what she thinks or feels, she is confused. She may wonder if her feelings are wrong. She may even deny to herself what she feels, that she feels what she feels. In Sister Outsider, Audre Lorde writes that racism and sexism are grown-up words, meaning that marginalised groups, including women, encounter abuse before they have words to articulate or make sense of what they encounter. The experiences of women explored in this paper highlight the importance of identifying and naming encounters of spiritual abuse. When spiritual abuses are not recognised, it has a significant impact on women whose experiences continue to go unvalidated. I name the spiritual abuse that occurs in the course of ordinary, lived spiritual or religious experiences and results in spiritual struggle and the emotional and psychological harm, everyday spiritual abuse. This naming is important. As Lisa Oakley contends, spiritual abuse can have a deeply damaging effect on those who experience it. Sarah Ahmed argues, words can then allow us to get closer to our experiences. Words can allow us to comprehend what we experience after the event. Having names for problems can make a difference. Before, you could not quite put your finger on it. With these words as tools, we can revisit our own histories. We hammer away at the past. When spiritual struggles occur as an ordinary and everyday part of lived Catholicism, they are often normalised, go unrecognised, or are dismissed. The acknowledgement and naming of everyday spiritual abuse creates the opportunity for the beginning of a process of transformation and healing.
Thank you, Dr. McEwan, for your support, for accepting our invitation to participate to this today's event. And I see that there is some movement in the chat. So now it's your turn. Susanna, my colleague, will help me to collect questions. If you have questions for the speakers, you may use the chat feature and write the question in one of the 5 languages. Just one logistical note: when you ask your question, first let us know who the question is directed to. Susanna?
Thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you, Rocio and Tracy, for your devastating analysis. I have to say that even if I knew what you will be talking about, I'm, as said, devastated by your analysis and by hearing Anna's testimonial. I would like to name what you, Tracy, said at the end, that it is so normalized that we even don't see this abuse. And I think it is very important to see that what's happening to religious sisters, what we saw in Anna's testimonial, is actually somehow part of our lives too, of all women Catholics or Catholics, I don't know. So my question would be to you, to Rocio and Tracy, because it's so structurally into church practice and theory, as Rocio showed, that my question would be, all these virtues that we learned from the beginning, from our baptism, sacrifice, letting go yourself, serving, obedience. Is there any place for those? Are they healthy version of those virtues? Can you leave those virtues in free and dignified way, or it's all just to rewrite?
I think largely what's happened is some of those things have been used as a type of like a redemptive violence, or the idea that, you know, if we continue to sacrifice, if we sacrifice to such a large extent, if we continue to be obedient, then somehow that gets us closer to God. And you know, it's the idea that the violence saves that I find, you know, so shocking and harmful to all, you know, in this particular context. You know, we heard in Anna's story how incredibly harmful, you know, that idea of that somehow, you know, you know, she was going to be saved by her obedience and suffering.
Yes, I would say also that, yeah, I think we are in the moment of redefine, because, for example, yes, authority is needed. It's not something that we have to eliminate. But we have to redefine, because the superior is not a representative of God. Of course, a community needs an authority, but it's like when you work in any office, you have a boss and you obey the boss, but you obey the boss because he is the authority and it's good for the community to structure, to order it, but not because he represents God. So I think we have to desacralize obedience. We have sacralized obedience as like that superior is a representative of God. No, it's a functional way of how to organize a community. So you don't have to submit your will or your reason or your faculties, and of course, it cannot invade your spiritual realm. So we have to redefine, but actually it's really profound. So we have to go to the roots and redefine, yeah, a little bit everything regarding the vows. And regarding the spirituality, also the word sacrifice, cross, has been manipulated and used in a wrong way. No, because and we have just cut some parts of the gospel, because God says you have to love the others as you love yourself, but that love to yourself has been annulled. So I think we have to recover and balance all the truths of the gospel and give voice to women, because it's not possible that just men can interpret the whole gospel.
In one voice in the chat, there is a suggestion about the figure of spiritual mother or father. How do you see this relationship? The fact that you usually, if you get involved in spiritual development, let's say, or any community, you tend to have the spiritual director, let's say, superior, or somebody who's leading you. Is this figure also to redefine? Is there a safe way to spiritual direction?
I think also that we continue having a patriarchal definition of obedience, like father, pater familias, father, mother, and all the rest have to obey and submit, and you are the child. No, we are not the child. So I think we have to redefine also what is a spiritual director. You do not obey your spiritual father. It's not your father. It's a person like you. You are an adult and you receive advice. And you can say, no, I don't like that advice. I don't think it's the right thing to do. So yes, I think all those terms like spiritual father or spiritual mother, I think are also very paternalistic. And we are grown-up people. We need, yes, people who advise us, who counsel us, and that's it. So yes, we have also to redefine that.
I think there's also, to an extent, we've got to think about whether, like, how we define, you know, what a relationship is, what a meaningful relationship is with Christ, and whether that relationship needs to be one of self-sacrifice and suffering. You know, yes, there is suffering and self-sacrifice in the Gospels, but you know, we're also called to flourish, you know, to live in abundance and in harmony with our neighbor and with God. And I think that we need to really think carefully what metaphors we take from scriptures and foreground.
There is one question to Tracy, especially in the chat. A question for definition or of showing boundaries. When does spiritual crisis, ambiguity, existential issues that we all live get defined as violence, abuse?
The way that I define it is I use the idea of spiritual struggle, and that when the spiritual trauma, of which there can be trauma like an existential problem, when it triggers a process of struggle, where the person, where it relates and causes a problem with the relationship with God or the divine, in addition to interpersonal struggles or difficulties like tension or conflict with family members, other church members or leaders, and also when like there is kind of cognitive dissonance between like questions and conflict with doctrine, and you know, kind of uncertainty, you know, and feelings of thoughts and behaviors, like we heard very powerfully in Anna's, you know, story, where it you know, that kind of spiritual uncertainty went, you know, kind of beyond, you know, that she was standing in there not knowing whether she was real or not. You know, there was like this kind of you know, huge conflict and tension around that. And we heard the same thing in Monica's story, where she said, you know, I don't know where I'm at, like I don't know who I am, like, you know, is this happening to me? You know, I don't understand. Is God punishing me in some way? And so I think when that struggle becomes so real, that's when it becomes like a spiritual abuse.
Thank you. We have also a question for Rocio. Religious life, as I have experienced it, I'm citing the question from the chat, especially in the early stages of formation, requires a clean break with one's previous life, and this necessarily undermines one's sense of self and identity in order to rebuild it around the charism of the congregation. Is this necessary? or are there different possible ways of forming religious life? Do they exist in concrete examples?
Yeah, I agree. I think that no, you cannot break with your past. We cannot break because our past is also ours. It's also us. You know? So I think that a good formation embraces the past, heals the past, opens to the future, but does not deny the past. So I think that one red flag also for our videos could be if in a community they tell you to shut the past of your life, to break with everything, with your family, with your friends. I think it's very unhealthy and it's not good. Of course, you have a new reality, a new life is also when as you get married, but is the same. But you must not just close your past, but embrace it and in a maturity process, no, in a mature process. If I know healthy groups, yes, I think there are. I have met some communities that are very mature. For example, here I have some friends from the Josephites, and I have to say it's a community when you see that they treat the people as mature people, they can dialogue with their superiors, they have their independence, they have everything is very mature, and it's a relationship of adults, not a childish, because the problem is that the formation sometimes treats the novices as children. And so this doesn't help the maturity of the person. But yes, I think there are some experiences that I heard about, and experiences also of Benedictines in Australia, that they were trying to live a very horizontal type of authority in which they live just like friends and discerning together the objectives of the community. So I think there are some groups that are trying to do better and well. I don't know many, but some.
Thank you very much, Rocio. I'm afraid that we have to close the question parts as we're running out of time, and we're giving some exhausting work to our interpreters. I would like to once again thank you all for participating and for all your comments that are in the chat. We see actually not only questions, but also very important comments. Mm-hmm. And many people are saying that this was a painful and eye-opening session. Thank you very much, Rocio and Tracy, and Anna, obviously, for opening our eyes brutally. And I think that's the first step also, as you said, to name things and try now to reconstruct it. And I would like only to cite one comment from Doris Reisinger, who is also with us today in the audience, that we have forgotten that the free evangelical councils are means to an end, not an end in themselves. And I think that's also one good point to start redefining this poverty, obedience, and all other virtues we have in the Christian spirituality. Thank you so much to all again. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you, Marilde, for introducing the session. And I would like to invite you to our events in the 16 days against gender-based violence. Tomorrow we go on air at 4 o'clock Central European time in the afternoon with sacramental abuse, which is quite close to the spiritual abuse, but we will try to pin it in more concrete ways. Sorry for Australia and New Zealand, but that's the time we will have some speakers from America, and we have to adjust to them. Thank you so much, And please follow us. We preserve all comments from the chat, and we definitely will learn from them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.